This changes everything. Just 1 minute ago inside the House of Commons, Nigel Farage launched what political insiders are already calling the most devastating parliamentary ambush in modern British history, and what happened next has sent shock waves through Westminster that are still reverberating. As I speak to you right now, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister who promised transparency and integrity, was left visibly shaken at the dispatch box. His hands trembled as he gripped his notes. The footage, and trust me, you need to see this, shows a leader who knows he's been caught, exposed in front of the entire nation, with nowhere to hide, and no prepared answer that could possibly save him. But before we get into the explosive details of what Farage actually said, you need to understand something crucial about what led to this moment. Because this wasn't some random parliamentary spat. This was calculated, meticulously planned. And according to 3 separate sources I've spoken with in the last 30 minutes, Farage has been sitting on this information for weeks, waiting for precisely the right moment to detonate it. One senior Reform UK advisor told me just 40 minutes ago, and I quote, "Nigel knew exactly when to strike. He waited until Starmer was at his most vulnerable, until the polls showed the cracks forming, and then he went for the jugular." Those are his exact words, the jugular. And from what we've witnessed, today that's not an exaggeration. This is political warfare at its most brutal, and the casualties are mounting by the hour. Now here's what actually happened. Inside that chamber at approximately 2:15 this afternoon, Prime Minister's questions was already tense. Labour backbenches were restless, still reeling from last week's disastrous immigration figures that showed a 23% increase in small boat crossings. Compared to this time last year, the Conservatives were circling like sharks, sensing blood in the water, and then Nigel Farage stood up, the entire chamber went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. MPs who were shuffling papers suddenly stopped. Even the speaker leaned forward in his chair. Because everyone in that room knew that when Farage rises with that particular expression on his face, someone's political career is about to end. Farage began calmly, too calmly. He thanked the Prime Minister for taking his question. He acknowledged the challenges facing the nation, standard parliamentary procedure. But then his tone shifted. His voice dropped an octave, and he said something that made every single person in that chamber sit up straighter in their seats. "Mr. Speaker, I have in my possession documents leaked to me by a whistleblower inside the very heart of this government that reveal a level of deception so profound, so calculated that it makes the expenses scandal look like a parking violation." The reaction was instantaneous. Labour MPs started shouting. Conservative MPs were trying to suppress grins. The speaker was banging his gavel, demanding order. But Farage wasn't finished, not even close. Here's where it gets absolutely explosive. According to these leaked documents, and I've been told by 2 separate journalists who've seen redacted versions that they're genuine, the Prime Minister's office has been running a secret WhatsApp group with select cabinet members, deliberately coordinating messaging to hide the true cost of their green energy transition plans from the British public. We're not talking about minor discrepancies here. We're talking about a systematic campaign to underreport the financial burden that ordinary, working families are going to face over the next 5 years. One leaked message, allegedly, from a senior cabinet minister whose name I cannot reveal for legal reasons, states, "We absolutely cannot let these figures go public before the local elections. Bury them in the appendix of the infrastructure report, where no journalist will find them." But wait, because this gets so much worse than you can possibly imagine. Farage then produced, and this is verified by 4 different political correspondents who were in the chamber, what he claimed was a breakdown of the actual projected costs, not the sanitized figures. The government has been feeding to Parliament and the press the real numbers, and they're staggering. According to Farage's document, which he's now published on social media, where it's already been viewed over 2 million times in the last hour, the average household energy bill is set to increase by not the 400 annually that the government has been claiming, but by 780. That's nearly double. That's the difference between families heating their homes adequately this winter or making impossible choices between heating and eating. The Prime Minister's response was nothing short of catastrophic. He stood at the dispatch box, visibly flustered, papers scattering as he fumbled for his prepared notes. His communications director in the gallery above was frantically typing on her phone. Every political analyst I've spoken with in the last half hour agrees on one thing they have never seen. Starmer looked this rattled, this unprepared, this cornered. He began by calling Farage's claims misleading and taken out of context, which is the standard political deflection. when you've been caught red-handed and everyone in the room knows it. But then Farage interrupted with a point of order. And what he said next brought the entire House to its feet in uproar. Mr. Speaker, if I am misleading. This House, then, why has the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero deleted her official WhatsApp account in the last 45 minutes? Let that sink in for a moment. 45 minutes, which means according to the timeline, she deleted that account within minutes of Farage beginning his attack. The implications are staggering if these messages are fabricated, if this is all some elaborate hoax, as Starmer wants us to believe. Then why would a cabinet secretary immediately destroy the very evidence that could exonerate her? Unless, of course, she's not trying to prove her innocence. She's trying to hide her guilt now, the media establishment is already trying to spin this as another Farage publicity stunt, another theatrical performance from a man they dismissed years ago as irrelevant. The Guardian published an article 17 minutes ago, calling it unfounded conspiracy theories. The BBC's political editor just tweeted that we should wait for independent verification before jumping to conclusions. But here's what they're conveniently ignoring. The whistleblower who leaked these documents to Farage is a civil servant with 23 years of unblemished service. This isn't some disgruntled intern or political operative with an axe to grind. This is someone who has worked under 5 different governments, who has served both Labour and Conservative administrations, with distinction who has finally reached a breaking point after witnessing what they describe in their anonymous statement as the most cynical manipulation of public information I have encountered in my entire career. Here's where the 110 diver and a quote pay pink story takes an even darker turn, and I need you to pay close attention to what I'm about to tell you. Within minutes of Farage's revelation, the government's rapid rebuttal unit, yes, they actually have a department dedicated specifically to suppressing inconvenient stories, went into overdrive. 3 separate fact-checking organizations, all of which receive funding either directly or indirectly from government-linked sources, simultaneously published articles questioning the authenticity of Farage's documents. The coordination is so blatant, so transparent, that even mainstream political commentators are raising eyebrows. One veteran BBC journalist speaking privately to colleagues in the conversation that was subsequently leaked said, "I've covered politics for 30 years, and I've never seen the establishment circle the wagons this quickly. If there was nothing to hide, they wouldn't be this desperate to kill the story before it gains momentum. But the British people aren't buying it anymore. They're not stupid. They've been lied to about immigration figures that mysteriously get revised upward months after elections. They've been deceived about NHS waiting times that somehow always improve in government reports, but get worse in their lived experience. They've been misled about the true economic impact of lockdown policies that were sold as temporary, but whose consequences will burden their grandchildren with debt. And now they're being told that these leaked documents revealing a coordinated deception about energy costs are somehow fake, despite a cabinet secretary deleting evidence, and despite the government's panicked overreaction, suggesting they're terrified of what else might come out. Social media is absolutely erupting right now. I'm looking at the trending topics as I speak to you, and 6 of the top 10 trending items in the United Kingdom are directly related to this story. The hashtag StarmerAlex has been used over 140,000 times in the last 90 minutes. What are they hiding? Is trending with over 80,000 mentions. But here's what's even more telling about the public. Mood ordinary people, not political activists, not party members, just regular British citizens who are struggling with the cost of living crisis, are sharing their own stories underneath these hashtags. A grandmother from Stoke-on-Trent posted that she's already choosing between heating her home and buying her prescription medications. A young father from Glasgow wrote that he's taking on a second job just to cover energy bills that have already doubled. A retired teacher from Somerset shared that she's wearing 3 layers of clothing indoors to avoid turning on the heating. These are real people facing real consequences, while their government plays word games and hides the truth. Now Starmer's defenders will argue that this is all being blown out of proportion, that every government manages sensitive information carefully. The energy transitions are complex and require careful public communication. And you know what? On some level, they're right. Governing is complicated. Economic transitions create winners and losers. Communication strategies are necessary. But here's the fundamental difference. Between careful messaging and calculated deception, careful messaging presents difficult truths in ways that help people understand complex issues. Calculated deception deliberately hides those truths, because you know that if people understood the real cost, the real impact, the real burden they're going to bear, they would never have voted for you in the first place. That's not governance. That's fraud. Let me give you some context that the mainstream media absolutely will not tell you, because it undermines their preferred narrative that this is just partisan politics as usual. 6 months ago, before the general election, Labour's manifesto promised that their green energy transition would create hundreds of thousands of jobs, lower household bills within 2 years, and establish Britain as a clean energy superpower. Those were their exact promises, printed in black and white, distributed to millions of voters who trusted that these weren't just empty campaign slogans, but genuine commitments, backed by rigorous economic analysis. Fast forward to today, and we're learning that the government has known, for months possibly since before they even published, that manifesto that the true cost would be nearly double what they told the electorate. If you knowingly make promises based on figures you know are false, what do you call that? In the private sector, we call that fraud in politics. Apparently, we call it sophisticated communication strategy. But wait, because there's another dimension to this story that's only just beginning to emerge, and it's potentially even more damaging than the financial deception, according to sources within the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, who are now coming forward, emboldened by the whistleblower's courage. There have been at least 7 different occasions over the past 4 months where civil servants prepared briefing documents with the accurate, unvarnished cost projections, only to have those documents sent back with instructions to revise the assumptions and present a more optimistic scenario. In plain English, they were told to cook the books. They were instructed to manipulate the data to produce politically convenient results rather than economically accurate forecasts. And when some of these civil servants raised concerns, through the proper internal channels, they were quietly reassigned to different departments, or told that their concerns had been noted and addressed, which is Whitehall code for shut up and do as you're told, the opposition. Parties are now smelling blood in the water, and they're circling with increasing aggression. The Conservative leader, who just an hour ago was facing questions about her own party's internal divisions, has suddenly found herself united with her backbenchers in demanding an immediate, independent inquiry. The Liberal Democrats, usually more measured in their parliamentary language, have called for the relevant cabinet secretary to resign immediately. Even some Labour backbenchers, those representing traditional working class constituencies, where energy bills are already causing genuine hardship, are privately expressing discomfort with what's emerged. One Labour MP from a northern constituency told a political journalist off the record, "If this is true, if we've been systematically lying about the cost, then we deserve everything that's coming to us. I didn't get into politics to deceive the people I represent. Here's what happens next and why the next 72 hours are absolutely critical for this government's survival." Farage has announced that he will be holding a press conference tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m., where he promises to release additional documents that he claims will show the full extent of the cover-up across multiple government departments. That's not just about energy costs, that's suggesting a pattern of deception that goes far wider and far deeper than we currently understand. The government has 3 options. They can attempt to discredit, forage, and dismiss these revelations as conspiracy theories, which is their current strategy, but which is becoming less credible by the hour as more corroborating evidence emerges. They can launch their own inquiry, control the terms of reference, and hope to contain the damage through a carefully managed process that produces conclusions months from now, when public attention has moved on. Or they can come clean, admit the deception, apologize to the British people, and face the political consequences with whatever dignity they can salvage. Based on everything we know about how modern governments operate when faced with existential threats to their credibility, they will almost certainly choose option 2, a tightly controlled inquiry designed to look like transparency, while actually functioning as a pressure valve to release public anger gradually over many months. But here's why that strategy might not work this time. The British people are exhausted. They're tired of inquiries that take years to produce, reports that nobody reads. They're fed up with politicians who apologize for mistakes and poor communication, while never accepting responsibility for the actual harm those mistakes caused. They're done with the political class that seems to operate by completely different rules than the rest of society, where you can lie to millions of people and face no real consequences, beyond a few uncomfortable news cycles. And here's something else that's emerging. From my conversations with Westminster, insiders over the last hour that should absolutely terrify this government. There are rumors unconfirmed but coming from multiple independent sources that at least 3 more whistleblowers are preparing to come forward with evidence of similar deceptions. In other policy areas, one source with close ties to the Treasury suggests that the government's official unemployment figures have been systematically manipulated by changing the classification criteria for who counts as actively seeking work effectively, hiding tens of thousands of people from the statistics. Another source within the Home Office claims there are internal memos showing that ministers were explicitly warned that their Rwanda deportation alternative scheme was legally unworkable, but they proceeded anyway because admitting failure would be politically embarrassing. A third source, whose department I cannot name without potentially identifying them, alleges that impact assessments for major infrastructure projects have been deliberately optimistic to secure funding approval, a guard slang, or a nanny sees knowing full well that costs will balloon once construction begins and it's too late to cancel. If even one of these additional allegations proves true, we're not looking at an isolated incident of poor judgment. We're looking at a culture of systematic dishonesty that permeates multiple levels of government. We're witnessing the normalization of deception as standard operating procedure, and that should alarm every single person regardless of their political affiliation, because once lying becomes the default mode of governance, rather than the exceptional case that ends careers, democracy itself begins to break down. You cannot have government by consent when that consent is manufactured through deliberate misinformation. You cannot have accountability when the information needed to hold leaders accountable is routinely falsified. You cannot have a functioning democracy when the social contract between rulers and ruled is built on a foundation of lies. The economic implications of this scandal are only just beginning to crystallize, and they're genuinely frightening for millions of households. If energy bills are going to increase by £780 annually instead of £400, that's an additional £380 that families weren't budgeting for. For a single mother working 2 part-time jobs, that could mean choosing between clothing her children adequately for winter or keeping the heating on. For a pensioner couple living on a fixed income, that could mean cutting back on food or social activities that keep them connected and healthy. For a young family already stretched to breaking point by mortgage rates that have tripled in 2 years, that could be the difference between staying afloat and going under. These aren't abstract statistics, these are real human consequences of political deception. And the people making these decisions will never personally feel the impact of their lies because they're insulated by ministerial salaries, expense accounts, and subsidized everything. Now, I need to address something that government supporters and media establishment figures are already pushing back with. They're saying that Farage is exploiting people's fears, that he's presenting complex policy challenges in simplistic terms, designed to inflame rather than inform, that responsible governance requires making difficult choices that won't always be popular. And there's a grain of truth in that critique. Farage is absolutely presenting this in the most politically damaging way possible. He's chosen his moment, his language, and his tactics to cause maximum harm to the government. But here's the question those critics need to answer. If the government had been honest from the beginning, if they had presented the real costs and the real challenges and trusted the British people to make informed decisions, would Farage have any ammunition whatsoever? The problem isn't that Farage is exploiting this situation. The problem is that the situation is exploitable because the government created the conditions through their own deception. The international implications are also starting to emerge, though they're being largely ignored by domestic coverage focused on the immediate political drama. Britain's green energy transition has been presented to international partners as a model for how to balance economic growth with environmental responsibility. Other countries have been watching closely, considering whether to adopt similar policies. If it now emerges that the British government has been systematically lying about the cost and viability of their approach, it doesn't just damage Labour's credibility. Domestically, it undermines Britain's soft power and international reputation. Foreign investors who were considering major green energy projects in the UK are now going to think twice. International partners who are collaborating on joint initiatives are going to question whether British government commitments can be trusted. The damage extends far beyond one political party or one parliamentary session. What we're witnessing right now in real time is the potential collapse of a government's moral authority just months after taking office. And that's not hyperbolically governments. Can survive economic crises, policy failures, even minor scandals. What they cannot survive is the perception that they fundamentally lack integrity, that they view the truth as optional, that they see voters not as citizens to be served, but as obstacles, to be managed through manipulation and deception. Once that perception takes hold, once people conclude that nothing their government tells them can be trusted, the social contract that holds democracy together begins to fray. We saw it happen with the expenses scandal that destroyed a generation of MPs' reputations. We saw it with the Partygate scandal that ultimately brought down Boris Johnson. And we may be seeing it again right now with Starmer, as it's being called, except this time, the deception isn't about personal behavior or isolated incidents. It's about systematic lying on issues that directly affect millions of people's daily lives. The betting markets, which are often better predictors of political outcomes than opinion polls, have dramatically shifted in just the last 2 hours. The odds of Labour losing their parliamentary majority at the next election have shortened from 12 to 1 to 5 to 1. The probability of Starmer being replaced as Labour leader before the next election has moved from 20 to 1 to 8 to 1. These aren't casual political observers placing small recreational bets. These are serious political analysts and institutional investors putting significant money behind their assessments of where this crisis is heading, and their collective judgment is that this government is in serious trouble, facing an existential threat that could reshape British politics for the next decade. Whether they're right or wrong, we'll know soon enough, but the fact that these dramatic shifts are happening so quickly tells you everything about how seismic this moment really is. There's also a generational dimension to this crisis that deserves attention because it reveals something profound about the changing nature of British politics. Young voters overwhelmingly supported Labour in the last election, attracted by promises of change, transparency, and a government that would finally prioritize their futures over protecting established interests. They were tired of conservative corruption and incompetence. They wanted something different. And now, just months into Labour's tenure, they're discovering that the new boss operates with the same cynical manipulation as the old boss. The disillusionment spreading through younger demographics right now is palpable. Scroll through TikTok or Instagram and you'll find thousands of young people expressing betrayal, anger, and a deepening cynicism about whether any political party can be trusted. This isn't just about one scandal or one policy area. This is about an entire generation potentially checking out of conventional politics altogether because they've concluded the whole system is rigged against honesty. So where does this leave us, the ordinary British citizens who just want honest government, affordable living costs, and politicians who respect us enough to tell the truth? We're left watching another political earthquake unfold in real time, knowing that regardless of who ultimately wins or loses this particular battle, the underlying crisis of trust between governed and governors continues to deepen. Farage has landed a devastating blow. Starmer is reeling. The establishment media is scrambling to control the narrative, and tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m., we may learn that everything we thought we understood about this story was just the beginning. This is far from over. In fact, it may just be getting started, and the British people are watching, waiting, and rapidly running out of patience with a political system that seems constitutionally incapable of telling them the truth.